Welcome to my channel. The night was heavy with rain, the kind that blurred city lights into streaks of gold and red. In the middle of that storm, Emily ran barefoot across the parking lot, her breath sharp and desperate. Behind her, a man's voice echoed through the thunder. Her ex, furious and drunk, shouting her name. She didn't look back. Her only thought was escape. The streets were empty, the sound of her heartbeat louder than the rain. That's when she saw it. A black car parked by the curb, sleek and silent, its tinted windows hiding whatever secrets it carried. Without thinking, she yanked the handle and slipped inside, slamming the door shut behind her. She crouched low, trembling, gasping for air. For a moment, all she could hear was the rain hitting the roof and the thunder rolling above. But then, a calm voice broke the silence. "You picked the wrong car, sweetheart." Her eyes darted up, and her breath caught. The man sitting behind the wheel wasn't her ex. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black suit that looked carved to fit him. His eyes were sharp, cold, and dangerous. Even in the dim light, she could see the faint scar tracing his jawline. He looked like someone used to being obeyed. Emily froze, words tangled on her lips. Please, I didn't know. Someone's after me." His gaze stayed on her, unblinking. "And you thought hiding in my car was safer?" He started the engine, his tone low and smooth. "You've got interesting instincts." The car glided away from the curb before she could even open the door. The city lights blurred past as the tires sliced through the rain. Emily's fear turned into confusion. Who was this man who didn't ask questions, who didn't yell or threaten, who simply drove with quiet control as if he owned the night itself? When he finally spoke again, his voice had softened just enough to make her heart race. "You don't have to look so scared," he said. "If I wanted to hurt you, I would have done it already." She swallowed hard. "Who are you?" He smiled slightly, eyes on the road. "Someone you shouldn't be seen with." They reached a gated mansion on the city's edge, stone walls, black iron gates, guards who moved with the kind of discipline that made her stomach twist. He parked and turned to her, the faintest hint of amusement in his gaze. "You wanted safety. Congratulations. You found the one place no one dares to look." She hesitated. "What do you mean?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Because this is where the city's fear lives." Lightning flashed behind him, and in that brief glow, she saw the truth in his eyes. She had stumbled into the car of Dominic Hale, the most feared man in the city. Inside the mansion, the air was warm and rich with the scent of cedar and whiskey. Dominic poured himself a drink, his every movement calm, deliberate. "You can stay until morning," he said. "But after that, you're gone." Emily nodded, though she could feel something between them shifting, a tension that hummed beneath every word. When she looked up, he was watching her again, studying her like a puzzle he didn't know how to solve. "Why was he chasing you?" Dominic asked. She hesitated before whispering. "Because he can't stand that I left." Dominic nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Good. Then maybe it's time someone else teaches him what fear feels like." Over the next few days, Emily found herself trapped in a world she didn't understand. Dominic's men treated her with respect, but they didn't talk much. She caught glimpses of power, meetings in the dark, calls made in hushed tones, men who flinched at his slightest command. Yet, around her, Dominic was different. He asked about her life, about the things she wanted to forget. She saw the cracks beneath his armor, the man who hid behind the legend. One evening, as they sat by the fire, he asked quietly, "Do you know what it's like to lose control of your own life?" She met his gaze and said, "Every day until I met you." But peace in his world never lasted long. The next night, Dominic's men brought in a prisoner, a familiar face that made Emily's blood run cold. Her ex-Dominic stood between them, his expression carved from stone. "So this is the man who thought he could hurt what's mine." Emily's eyes widened. "Dominic, he's not." He stopped her with a glance. "He was. The moment you stepped into my car, you stopped belonging to him." The tension in the room was unbearable. Her ex spat curses, calling Dominic a monster. Dominic didn't move, but his words were colder than any threat. "You're right," he said, "but she doesn't need saving from me." He turned to her, his voice gentler. "Do you want him gone?" She hesitated, then nodded. Dominic waved his hand. The man was dragged away, his screams fading into silence. After that night, something changed between them. Emily couldn't look at him without remembering the danger he carried. The way he'd claimed her with words that sounded like both protection and possession. Yet she couldn't deny the pull. The way his touch burned. The way his presence silenced every fear she'd ever had. He told her once, "Power doesn't scare people, sweetheart. Love does, because it makes you vulnerable." She understood then that beneath all the control, Dominic was as lost as she was. One night, as the city slept under a quiet sky, she stood on the balcony overlooking the lights below. Dominic joined her, his hand brushing against hers. "You could still leave," he said softly. "The gates are open." She turned to him, her voice steady. "If I wanted freedom, I wouldn't have chosen your car." His eyes softened, something unspoken passing between them. He leaned in, his lips ghosting over hers. "Then stay," he whispered, and when she kissed him back, it wasn't fear or accident that bound them anymore. It was choice. From that night forward, she was no longer the woman who ran, and he was no longer the man the city feared. Together, they became something new, two broken souls finding safety in the one place no one expected. The rain hadn't stopped when the car rolled through the gates of Dominic Hale's mansion. Lightning flashed above the iron walls, and thunder echoed across the courtyard like the beat of an approaching storm. Emily sat stiff in her seat, her soaked hair clinging to her face, heart still thundering from the chase she'd escaped. Dominic didn't look at her as he drove through the long, tree-lined path that led to the estate. His focus never wavered, his posture straight, his hands gripping the steering wheel with calm precision. Everything about him spoke of quiet danger, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to make the world listen. The moment the car stopped beneath the glowing lanterns of the entrance, he stepped out without a word. The cold air rushed in as the door opened, and one of his men appeared, tall and silent, holding an umbrella. Dominic didn't speak to him either. A single glance was enough. The man nodded and turned to Emily. "This way, miss." Inside, the mansion was a different world, warm light, expensive art, and the faint scent of leather and smoke. Emily followed carefully, her wet shoes leaving small prints on the marble floor. She felt out of place, a stranger in someone else's empire. Every wall seemed to hold secrets. Every hallway whispered stories she wasn't supposed to hear. Dominic led her into a room that felt more like a command center than a living space. The walls were lined with books and monitors. A map of the city spread across one wall with red markers dotting certain neighborhoods. He poured himself a drink and finally turned to face her. His eyes, now softer under the amber light, studied her in silence before he spoke. Who was he? Emily hesitated, her voice trembling as she said, "My ex. He doesn't take no very well." Dominic nodded slowly, swirling the glass in his hand. "You ran from him straight into my car. That's a hell of a shortcut." His words carried a dry humor, but there was no smile in his eyes. "You're lucky I didn't shoot you." Emily froze, unsure if he was joking. "I didn't know where else to go," she said quietly. "I just saw the car and—" He interrupted softly. "And you thought it was safe?" He let out a low, bitter laugh. "No one ever thinks the devil drives a black car." He moved closer, his presence heavy but not cruel. "You can stay until morning," he said, setting the glass down. "My men will make sure your ex doesn't get anywhere near this property." Relief washed through her, but it was fleeting. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she should be grateful or afraid. He nodded once and turned away. "Don't thank me yet." He paused at the door. "You'll stay in the East Wing. Someone will bring you dry clothes." And then he was gone, leaving her alone with the hum of the rain and the echo of her own heartbeat. Hours later, Emily lay awake in a room larger than her entire apartment. The bed was soft. The sheets smelled of cedar and expensive cologne, but she couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the image of Dominic's face. The hard lines, the quiet confidence, the way his voice seemed to command even the silence. Who was he really? She had heard whispers about men like him, stories told in low voices about the man who controlled half the city from the shadows. People called him ruthless, untouchable, the kind of man who solved problems with one phone call. And yet, when she looked into his eyes, she had seen something else. Not cruelty, not chaos, something more complicated. She rose from the bed and crossed the room, the rain still tapping softly against the windows. The mansion was quiet now, but not empty. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear faint voices, low, urgent, and muffled behind closed doors. Curiosity got the better of her. She stepped into the hallway, her bare feet silent against the polished floor. The sound led her toward a grand staircase, and from there, she could see the glow of light spilling from the open door of the study below. Dominic stood inside, his back to her, phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care how he found her," he said, voice low and sharp. "He crossed a line. If he comes near my property again, make sure he doesn't walk away." The calm in his tone was more terrifying than any shout. He ended the call and stood there for a moment, shoulders tense, before pouring himself another drink. Emily should have turned around. She knew she should, but something about the quiet strength in him kept her there, hidden behind the railing, watching. He wasn't what she expected. He didn't pace or curse. He simply stood still, staring out the window into the storm as if the world outside was his reflection. Suddenly, he spoke without turning. "You shouldn't sneak around in my house." Her breath caught. She froze, realizing he had known she was there all along. Slowly, she stepped into the light. "I didn't mean to. I heard you talking and—" Her voice trailed off. His gaze found hers, steady and unreadable. "And now you know the kind of man you're staying with." "I already guessed," she whispered. "You're not exactly subtle." He smirked faintly, his first real expression of amusement since she'd met him. "No, I'm not." He walked toward her, his footsteps slow, measured. "You're safe here," he said. "But that doesn't mean you should trust me." She met his eyes. "If I didn't trust you, I would have run again." For a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe admiration, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "You've got nerve," he said softly. "I'll give you that." He brushed past her, stopping just close enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence. "Go back to bed, Emily. Tomorrow we'll see if your ex still has the courage to come knocking." She nodded, though her heart was anything but calm. As she turned to leave, she heard him murmur behind her, barely loud enough to catch. "And if he does, he won't leave alive." That night she didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts a blur of fear and fascination. The man she had stumbled upon by mistake was not a savior, but he wasn't a villain either. He was something in between. And as the storm outside began to fade, she realized something terrifying. The danger she'd run from might have ended the moment she stepped into Dominic Hale's car. But another kind of danger had just begun. Morning arrived quietly, but the tension in the mansion felt heavier than the night before. The rain had stopped, yet the air still smelled like storm and smoke. Emily sat by the window, watching sunlight struggle through the clouds, her thoughts tangled in the events of last night. She had expected Dominic to disappear before dawn, but when she walked downstairs, he was already there. Leaning against the kitchen counter in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, a mug of coffee in his hand. The world outside might have feared him, but in that moment he looked almost human. He glanced up when he saw her, his eyes softer than she remembered. "You didn't sleep," he said. It wasn't a question. She shook her head. "It's hard to sleep when you're not sure if you're a guest or a hostage." He smiled faintly at that, a ghost of humor flickering through his expression. "Maybe a little of both," he said. "But you're safe. My men checked the perimeter. No one's getting in or out without me knowing." His tone was calm, certain, like he controlled the very air around them. He handed her a cup of coffee and motioned for her to sit. "I had your things brought here from your apartment," he said. You won't be going back for a while. She frowned, confused. You sent someone to my apartment? Yes, he replied, taking a sip from his own mug. You had no locks worth keeping anyone out. And your ex isn't the kind of man who takes rejection quietly. His gaze was steady, but beneath the calm, she could hear it, the promise of danger. He won't come near you again. Not while you're under my roof. For a long moment she didn't speak. Part of her wanted to thank him. Another part wanted to run. Why are you helping me? She finally asked. He studied her face as if searching for something. Because I don't like seeing people afraid, he said. And because I have a bad habit of fixing broken things. She held his gaze. And what happens when you can't fix me? His expression darkened just a little. Then I'll keep you close enough to make sure no one else tries. The words made her heart skip. Not from fear, but from something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't just protection he offered. It was possession disguised as safety. He set his cup down and straightened, his tone shifting back to business. I have a meeting downtown, he said. Stay here. Don't talk to anyone. Don't open the doors. Understand? She nodded, and before she could ask where he was going, he was gone. His men following like shadows as the black car disappeared down the drive. The silence that followed was strange. The mansion felt too big, too empty without him in it. Hours passed before she finally wandered through the halls again, drawn by curiosity more than anything else. Every room she entered told a story about the man she barely knew. His study was filled with old books and maps. His office with screens and files that made her uneasy. But it was the piano room that stopped her. Dust covered the keys, but the sheet music was still open, as if someone had been playing once and never returned. She sat down and pressed a single key. The sound was soft, lonely, echoing off marble walls. Behind her, a voice said, "She used to play that piece." Emily turned sharply. One of Dominic's men stood in the doorway, older, sharp-eyed, but not unkind. "Who did?" she asked. The man stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "A woman who thought she could change him." He gave a small shrug. "No one's heard her name in a long time." "What happened to her?" Emily asked. The man paused before answering. "She left. Or maybe she didn't. In this world, it's hard to tell the difference." When Dominic returned that evening, the air in the mansion changed again. It wasn't visible, but she could feel it. A shift in the weight of the room, a quiet that followed him wherever he went. He found her in the piano room, her fingers still resting on the keys. "You shouldn't be in here," he said softly, not angry, just different. She looked up at him. "I wanted to understand you." "Then you're already in danger," he replied, crossing the room. "People who try to understand me don't usually like what they find." She met his gaze, refusing to look away. "You don't scare me." He smirked faintly. "You should." But the tension in his voice betrayed him. He sat beside her on the piano bench, his shoulder brushing hers. For a long moment they didn't speak. The world outside seemed to vanish, the sound of rain returning, the low hum of thunder, the faint rhythm of their breathing filling the space between them. He pressed a key, then another, playing the same notes she had. "My mother taught me this," he said quietly, "before everything changed." She turned to him, surprised. "I didn't know you played." "There's a lot you don't know about me," he murmured. "And I plan to keep it that way." Yet his tone wasn't cold. It was tired, heavy, like he carried the weight of too many lives in his silence. After a while, he stood and walked to the window, staring into the dark. "Your ex isn't the problem anymore," he said. "He's gone." Emily froze. "Gone?" "He left the city," Dominic said, his voice flat. "He got the message." She wanted to believe him, but a chill ran down her spine. "What did you do?" He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Nothing you need to worry about." Her chest tightened. "I didn't want him dead, Dominic." He stepped closer, eyes locked on hers. "And I didn't say he was. But you need to understand something." His voice dropped lower. "In my world, The only way to protect someone is to make sure everyone else is too afraid to touch them. The truth of his words frightened her, yet it also pulled her closer. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't the one running. She was standing still, protected by a man who could move mountains with a whisper. "Why me?" she asked quietly. His jaw tightened. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I intend to find out." That night, she dreamed of thunder and music, the echo of the piano, his voice, and the way his hand had brushed hers before he left the room. When she woke, she couldn't tell whether she was more afraid of the danger that surrounded him, or the way her heart had started to race whenever he was near. The next morning began with sunlight spilling across the marble floors of the mansion, but inside those walls, nothing felt calm. The world outside was waking up, yet Dominic and Emily were caught in a stillness that felt almost unreal, like a quiet before something terrible. Dominic had left before dawn again. He was always leaving, always returning with the smell of rain and smoke on his clothes, as if the city itself clung to him. But that morning, Emily noticed something different. He hadn't looked at her when he walked past. No faint smirk, no teasing remark. Just a silence that felt colder than any winter wind. Hours passed. She tried reading, tried cleaning the guest room she didn't own, tried anything to distract herself from the pull she felt toward him. Every sound in that mansion reminded her of him. The heavy footsteps down the hall, the way the doors closed softly, like secrets being locked away. And then, late that afternoon, she heard voices in the hall. Two men speaking in hushed tones. One voice she recognized, Dominic's. The other was unfamiliar. "She shouldn't be here," the stranger said. "You're risking too much for a woman you barely know." "I know enough," Dominic replied, calm but sharp. "She's under my protection." "Protection?" The man laughed. "You mean obsession." A pause followed, the kind that carried danger. Then Dominic's voice dropped to something darker. "Be careful what you call it." Emily's pulse raced. She backed away from the door just as it opened. Dominic stood there, his dark suit drenched from the rain, eyes locking on hers. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, without a word, he gestured for her to follow. They walked down a long corridor until they reached a smaller room she hadn't seen before. It was lined with maps and monitors, red dots blinking across the city. He poured himself a drink and finally spoke. "You were listening again." She didn't deny it. "You're hiding something." He looked up at her, eyes like steel. "I hide everything, Emily. That's how I stay alive." "Then why keep me here?" she asked softly. "Why risk everything for me?" For a long time he said nothing. Then he crossed the space between them in 3 slow steps. "Because you remind me of what I lost," he said. "And because every time I try to send you away, I can't." The words hit her harder than she expected. She wanted to speak, to tell him she wasn't his past. But before she could, the sound of a phone vibrating cut through the air. Dominic looked down, and all color drained from his face. He handed her the glass he was holding and stepped aside to take the call. "Talk." His tone shifted instantly, colder, sharper. "What do you mean she's gone?" Emily froze. He listened in silence, jaw tightening, before saying only one word, "Find her." Then he hung up, tossed the phone onto the desk, and ran a hand through his hair. She stared at him. "What happened?" He looked at her, eyes burning. "A shipment went missing. Someone's making moves against me." "And you think it's about me?" she asked. "I think," he said slowly, "you walked into my world the same day someone decided to start a war." He turned toward the monitors again, hands braced against the desk. "You shouldn't have gotten into my car that night." Her voice was barely a whisper. "You think I regret it?" He turned, meeting her gaze. "You should." The silence that followed was thick with everything they couldn't say. She wanted to tell him that fear and longing were now tangled inside her like vines, impossible to separate. He wanted to tell her that the more he tried to protect her, the more she became his weakness. Instead, he said, "Go upstairs. Lock the door." "Dominic?" "Please," he said, voice low but pleading this time. I don't want you to see what happens next." But that night, she didn't stay in her room. She stood at the top of the staircase, watching from the shadows as Dominic met with his men below. The firelight cast long, sharp shadows across his face as he spoke. "If they touch her," he said, his tone like thunder, "I will burn every piece of the city until I find who did it." That was when she understood. He wasn't protecting her because it was right. He was protecting her because he couldn't stop himself. His heart, for all its darkness, had chosen her without permission. And though she feared him, she couldn't stop herself from loving the man beneath the monster. Later, when the house fell silent again, she went to his office. He was sitting alone, staring at the empty glass in his hand. She hesitated, then stepped closer, resting her hand lightly on his shoulder. He didn't flinch. "I told you to stay upstairs," he murmured. "I know," she said softly, "but I don't want you fighting this alone." He looked up at her then, and for the first time, his eyes weren't the eyes of a crime lord. They were human, haunted, tired. "You shouldn't want to stand next to me," he whispered, "because once you do, there's no going back." "Maybe," she said, voice trembling. "I don't want to go back." The distance between them vanished. The tension that had burned for days finally broke as he pulled her close, their lips meeting in a moment that felt both forbidden and inevitable. It wasn't gentle, it was desperate, the kind of kiss that made the rest of the world disappear. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers and said quietly, "If anything happens to you because of me, I'll never forgive myself." The storm had returned outside, wind howling through the trees, thunder echoing across the night. But inside that room, the world had narrowed to two people standing on the edge of something dangerous and unstoppable. Neither of them knew that in the shadows beyond the gate, headlights were cutting through the rain, an army of black cars rolling toward the mansion. And by the time Dominic realized they weren't alone, it would already be too late. The rain fell harder that night, drumming against the windows like a warning no one could hear. The world outside Dominic Hale's mansion was cloaked in mist, the kind that made the city's edges blur and disappear. Inside, everything was quiet, too quiet. Emily lay awake in her room, her heart still beating fast from the memory of his kiss, that moment that had felt like both surrender and danger. She had told herself she would stay away from him, that she wouldn't fall deeper into his world, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, the way he looked at her, as if she was the only thing left that made sense in a life built on chaos. Downstairs, Dominic stood by the window of his study, staring out into the darkness. The rain streaked the glass like ghostly fingers. He hadn't told her everything. There was no point. Some truths were too heavy to speak aloud. He knew someone was coming. The same enemies who had taken from him before, who now wanted to finish what they started. His instincts screamed that Emily was the key. They'd used her to get to him, and now they would use her again to break him. He poured himself another drink, the amber liquid trembling slightly in the glass. "If they come for her," he muttered, "they'll have to walk over my body first." The mansion's lights flickered, just once. A subtle warning. Dominic's hand went instantly to the gun at his waist. The generator kicked back on, humming low. His phone buzzed. One message. No signature. Just 2 words. "She's here." He froze. The world seemed to narrow around him. His past, the ghost he thought he'd buried, the woman who had once owned his heart and destroyed his soul, was coming. And she wasn't coming alone. Outside the gate, black cars moved through the rain in perfect formation. Their headlights cut through the fog, slicing the night open like knives. Men in dark coats stepped out silently, armed and efficient. And in the center of it all, stepping out of the lead car, was her, Isabella. The woman Dominic had once promised the world to. The woman he had mourned. The woman he now realized had never died. Upstairs, Emily stirred. A noise, a thud, faint but sharp, echoed through the halls. She sat up, heart pounding, listening. The next sound was closer. Boots on marble, a door slamming open somewhere below. The alarms hadn't gone off. That meant whoever had come knew exactly how to shut them down. Panic surged through her. She ran to the door, but it swung open before she reached it. Dominic's man, Marco, stood there, eyes hard. "Stay quiet," he said. "We have company." "What's happening?" she whispered. He didn't answer. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but him." The moment he was gone, she did as he said. But locking the door didn't stop her from hearing the chaos erupt below. Gunfire cracked like thunder. Shouts echoed through the mansion. And the once beautiful silence of Dominic's empire broke apart in seconds. She covered her ears, tears burning her eyes. The world she'd stumbled into by accident was shattering, and she didn't know if anyone would survive it. In the hall below, Dominic moved like a storm himself. Calm, deliberate, lethal. Every shot he fired found its mark. His men followed his lead, holding the line against the intruders. But when the smoke cleared for a breathless second, he saw her standing there. Isabella, untouched by the violence around her, her black coat glistening with rain. She smiled when she saw him. "You never could stay out of trouble," she said softly. His gun lowered just slightly. "You're supposed to be dead." She tilted her head. "Maybe I was. You made sure of that." "You lied to me," he said, his voice breaking with restrained fury. "No, Dominic," she replied, stepping closer. "You lied to yourself. You thought you could build an empire and keep love pure. But love and power don't live in the same house." Before he could speak again, one of her men lunged from behind a pillar. Dominic spun, firing instinctively, taking the man down. By the time he turned back, Isabella had vanished into the smoke. Upstairs, Emily couldn't take it anymore. She couldn't just sit and wait while the sounds of battle echoed below. She unlocked the door, slipping into the corridor. The hallway was dark, the emergency lights casting everything in blood-red shadows. She could hear footsteps, fast, heavy, and voices shouting commands. When she turned the corner, she froze. Isabella was there, standing at the top of the grand staircase, calm as death. "You must be the girl," Isabella said, her voice smooth as silk. "The one who hides in cars that don't belong to her." Emily took a step back. "Who are you?" "The first mistake he ever made," Isabella said with a faint smile. "And the last thing he'll ever lose." Dominic's voice boomed from below. "Isabella." She turned her head slightly, her smile widening. "There's that voice. The one that once said he'd burn the world for me." "I will again," he shouted, emerging from the smoke, gun raised. "If you touch her." Isabella's gaze flicked back to Emily. "You think he's protecting you?" "He's protecting himself. Because if you die, what's left of him dies too." Before Emily could react, one of Isabella's men grabbed her from behind, dragging her toward the railing. Dominic fired, hitting the man's shoulder, but not before the woman he once loved whispered, "Let's see if he still bleeds for something he can't keep." Emily screamed as she stumbled, her hand slipping against the polished rail. Dominic threw his gun aside and lunged forward, catching her just as she lost balance. For a moment, time froze. The sound of rain, the scent of smoke, the flash of fear in her eyes. He pulled her back into his arms, heart pounding. She was shaking, terrified, but alive. Isabella watched from the shadows below, her eyes glistening. "You'll regret choosing her," she said. "I already regret ever choosing you," Dominic replied coldly. Sirens wailed in the distance. His men had called reinforcements, but when he looked again, Isabella was gone. The black cars outside were retreating into the fog, leaving only silence and ruin behind. Hours later, as the rain slowed and dawn painted the sky gray, Dominic sat beside Emily in the shattered hallway. Her head rested on his shoulder, her breath shallow but steady. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry you had to see that." She looked up at him, eyes wet. "You tried to save me. That's all I saw." He smiled faintly. "You don't know what I've done." "Maybe," she said softly, "but I know what you just did." For the first time, he let the mask fall. The fear, the guilt, the weariness, all of it showed in his eyes. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. She reached up, touching his cheek. "Maybe not." But I'm not leaving. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Inside, two broken souls sat in the wreckage of a night that had changed everything. Love had survived the bullets, the ghosts, the lies. But as the light of dawn crept through the broken windows, Dominic knew it wasn't over. Because somewhere in the city, Isabella was still alive, and she would never forgive him for choosing someone else. The first rays of dawn stretched over the city, painting the sky in muted shades of gold and gray. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in the soaked streets and shattered windows of Dominic Hale's mansion. Inside, silence hung like a heavy fog, broken only by the faint hum of distant sirens and the slow, unsteady breathing of two people who had survived the night by luck, by instinct, and by something stronger than either dared to name. Emily sat on the edge of the grand staircase, wrapped in one of Dominic's jackets. The fabric was far too large, the sleeves covering her hands, but it felt safe, warm, alive with the faint scent of him, leather, smoke, and rain. She stared down at the marble floor, still streaked with blood and fragments of glass that glittered in the morning light. The mansion that had once terrified her now looked fragile, as if even its walls were exhausted. Dominic stood by the window, a bandage around his arm where a bullet had grazed him. His eyes were shadowed, but not by pain, by something deeper, something he didn't want to name. His empire had always been built on silence and control, but last night had shattered both. He could rebuild the walls, restore his power, erase the evidence. But he couldn't erase her. Not from his thoughts. Not from the way his heart had betrayed him every time she spoke his name. Emily broke the silence first. "You saved me," she said softly. He turned, eyes meeting hers. "No," he replied. "You made me want to." She rose slowly, crossing the distance between them. Her steps were light, but her voice was steady. "I heard what she said," she murmured. "That I'm the reason they came. That I was used to get to you." He didn't deny it. "She's right," he said quietly. "They knew I'd protect you. They knew it would make me weak." Her brow furrowed. "Is that what you think I am? Your weakness?" He hesitated, then looked away. "I think you're the only thing that makes me human." For a moment, the world seemed to stop again. His confession hung between them, raw and dangerous. Emily stepped closer, her hand finding his. "Maybe that's not weakness, Dominic," she said. "Maybe that's what you've been fighting for all along." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw the man behind the legend. Not the Mafia king who ruled through fear, but the boy who had once learned the piano, who had loved and lost and turned that pain into armor. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't belong in my world, Emily." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe your world needs to change." Before he could respond, the sound of approaching cars shattered the fragile peace. Dominic's men moved quickly, weapons drawn, but he raised a hand, stopping them. Through the broken gates, black SUVs rolled into view. Only this time they bore no insignias of his enemies. These were police vehicles. And at the front, a familiar figure stepped out. Detective Monroe, a man Dominic had dealt with before, though not as an ally. Monroe's eyes swept over the destruction, then landed on Dominic. "Hell of a night you had," he said. Dominic didn't flinch. "You should see the other side." Monroe's gaze shifted to Emily. "She's the reason we're here," he said. "Your ex-boyfriend made a call before he disappeared. Told us everything. About her, about you, about the people you deal with." Emily stiffened. "What do you mean, disappeared?" Monroe shrugged. "No one's seen him since last night. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Hale?" Dominic didn't answer. His silence was an admission in itself. Monroe sighed. "You've made enemies in every corner of this city, Dominic. You can't keep pretending you're untouchable." Dominic stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "I don't pretend," he said quietly. "I just survive." Monroe studied him for a long moment before nodding to his men. "We're done here for now. But if she gets hurt again or if you disappear, I'll come for you myself." Dominic smirked faintly. "You'll need a bigger team." When the police left, the mansion fell silent again. Emily turned to him. What happens now? He exhaled slowly, as if the question weighed more than any threat. Now, he said, you have a choice. He walked to the window, watching the city wake. You can leave. Start over somewhere they'll never find you. I'll make sure you have everything you need. Her heart sank. And you? I'll stay, he said simply. This is my world, Emily. I built it from blood. I can't walk away from it. She stepped closer, her voice breaking slightly. But you don't have to be this man anymore. You don't have to keep fighting ghosts. He turned, eyes burning with a quiet sadness. I don't know how to stop. For a long moment they just stood there. Two people on opposite sides of a line neither of them had drawn. Then she reached up, cupping his face in her hands. Then let me show you. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, let himself breathe. The tension in his shoulders eased, the weight he carried for so long seeming to lift just a little. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. If I let you in, he whispered, there's no turning back. She smiled softly. I never wanted to. Outside, the rain began again. Not violent this time, but soft, steady, like the world was washing itself clean. Dominic took her hand and led her toward the door, past the wreckage, past the smoke and broken glass, toward the faint light of morning. They stepped outside together, into a world still scarred but alive. For the first time, Dominic didn't look like the city's most feared man. He looked like someone finally ready to live. But as they walked toward his car, Emily noticed something glinting under the hood of the nearest vehicle. A small metal pendant, shaped like a rose. She picked it up, frowning. What's this? Dominic froze. His blood ran cold. That pendant wasn't hers. It wasn't his. It was Isabella's. He took it from her gently, his expression darkening. It means she's still out there, he said quietly. And she's not finished. Emily looked at him, fear and understanding in her eyes. Then what do we do now? He met her gaze, his tone calm but resolute. Now, he said, we stop running. The camera would fade out there. The two of them standing in the mist, the mansion behind them, the city before them. The rain fell softly around them, washing away the blood but not the past. And as Dominic's voice echoed in the silence, steady, low, and final, it carried the weight of both love and war. Because no one, he said, takes what's mine ever again. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more romantic tales that keep your heart racing till the very end.